Hello, everyone. Greyson Geiler here with SES Services Weekly. I like to take some news from the financial media, go a little bit further into depth with it. Today, we're going to be talking about how unemployment is staying so stubbornly low, even with the Federal Reserve raising interest rates. Plus, we're going to talk about the U.S. debt downgrade from Fitch, which happened last week. Okay, so as everyone knows, the Federal Reserve is raising interest rates. We've got an overnight discount rate out of the Federal Reserve that's north of 5% right now. So this is the fastest pace of interest rate raises, however you term it, since Volcker back in the early 80s. So we haven't seen this in a long, long time. One of the most surprising things, first of all, and we've said it in our weekly write-ups, the U.S. economy is remaining surprisingly firm through these higher interest rates, considering we had 13, 14, 15 years of pretty much zero interest rates. Intuitively, the economy wouldn't hold together when the price of money goes so high so fast, but it has. The real numbers that are continue to surprise are the employment numbers. According to the U.S. Commerce Department, everyone who's looking for a job could get a job, and we would still have 4 million unpersoned jobs in the economy. So it's surprisingly firm. We can go into a lot of discussion about why exactly it is so firm. Of course, the federal government, even state government in general, the responses to the COVID were 180 degrees wrong, terrible on every level, paying people to stay home, telling people they have to work remotely, or whatever the case may be. The entire response out of the government was terrible. In addition to that, the Federal Reserve conjured $6 or $8 trillion out of thin air. Now the Federal Reserve is trying to mop up some of that extra liquidity with higher interest rates. Well, one of the most important indicators of inflation is how is the employment market doing? One of the biggest costs to all businesses is the cost of labor. So when everybody who wants a job can get a job, and there are still more jobs out there looking for people, the price of employment goes higher. So that, of course, that keeps inflation higher than the Federal Reserve wants it to be. Federal Reserve is still talking about bringing inflation down to that 2% level, but it's not going to happen as tight as the labor market is. Why is the labor market so tight? Again, bad performance out of our government. Ed Dowd is a former BlackRock guy on Wall Street. His thesis is that the vaccinations have added some 2 or 3 million people to the disabled roster. So it's cutting into the employment, the number of people that are employable. That's his thesis. We haven't had the opportunity to vet that. Look further into his research, but he's very confident with it. And that's something that could certainly be a contributing factor. But at the end of the day, the employment is staying relatively high, which, that's not the situation where we have an absolute economic meltdown where everyone has a job and is earning money. But on the other side of the coin, we've got some serious concerns out there with a lot of economic data doesn't look so good. Some of the shipping numbers, which is a front end indicator of how the economy is doing, some of the shipping numbers, worldwide freight numbers, aren't so great. Big data came out, or big information came out last week with Fitch downgrading the U.S. government debt from AAA to AA+. Now that's gonna continue to add to inflation. That's an inflationary situation. Imagine if you were looking to get a new credit card and your credit had just gotten downgraded. Well, of course, you're going to have to pay a higher interest rate to get credit. So essentially, that just happened to the entire United States with Fitch downgrading our credit rating. It's terrible news, and this is stuff we've been talking about for quite some time. Just it's only a matter of time before printing and spending, borrowing and spending, there's a backside to that. So what you're looking at right here is a debt to GDP chart. So going back to 2000, the US had government debt, sovereign debt at some 55% of the GDP. Well, clearly that number just continues to rocket higher. And during COVID, because the economic numbers went down so far, the GDP, the divisor went down so far. So this number rocketed. The debt to GDP, the total debt to the economy, rocketed over 130%. Now it's pulled back quite a bit as the economy has recovered post-COVID, but we keep stacking on more debt. Also keep in mind, this is out of the St. Louis Federal Reserve. And the last data they have is the end of the first quarter. So there's a little bit of a pullback on this chart, something that has bounced higher since then, because remember, we had a debt ceiling issue and Congress was fighting back and forth on releasing the debt limit, which they did. So since this chart, at the end of the first quarter, we've stacked more than $1 trillion onto debt. So if we had this to today's numbers, we'd be looking more closer to back up to the 130. So these are the kind of numbers that Fitch is looking at when they're downgrading our debt. This cannot be blamed on one person. Every administration is going to try to blame previous administrations. That's just how government works. But this is clearly, take a look, this has been in the works for decades. Some economic research that is widely referenced, and it's been several years, but Rogoff is the name, an economic researcher who looked back at the history of debt defaults out of sovereign governments. And there's something around that 90% of GDP when a government goes into debt in the area of 90% of their GDP, there tends to be a restructuring, tends to be some sort of a default. Clearly, we're way above 90% of our GDP in debt. Also, we are the world's reserve currency, which is going to account for some of that, being able to hold together, for decades past 90% of GDP, but it's still a concern. And that's the reason Fitch is downgrading. We're looking at year over year, US federal government budget deficits going higher. We're past the COVID. We would think some of the budget deficit would be coming back in, but it's not. With the huge expense of supporting Ukraine over Russia, among other things, the government budget deficit is getting worse rather than better. Now, one of the things that may change that is when student loan payments start being required to be paid again. Remember, our federal government owns north of $1 trillion of these student loans, and they're using that as the student loan payments they were using as some of their operating income. Of course, when they put the stop to forcing people to pay their student loans back, that's contributed to higher budget deficits. Supposedly, that is going to end in 2024. So maybe these budget deficits can come back down. Hopefully, we can tighten some of the numbers and get a better credit rating. But at the end of the day, it's not a good sign. Next week, we're going to talk a little bit about how to formulate a plan B. Because it's a little disconcerting watching our government debt get downgraded. So if you like the information we're putting out, smash that like button, subscribe to our channel, forward this message on to friends and family. If there's anything we can do to help, we offer some of our time, no obligation consultation with regard to your own financial situation. We can do it Zoom, we can do it in the office. Just reach out to us and we are here to help. Thanks for your time, and we'll see you next week.